All right. Welcome to, this is week 3 of engineering ethics at NJIT. We're going to be doing lesson 3 today. This is the online discussion section. Remember, the point of this discussion section is mostly for people to come talk about the material. I don't really want it to be lecture so much. So what I'm going to do is I have the presentation up. I'm going to go through it and just sort of introduce what the different readings are, the different course themes, just to give everyone an introduction. Hopefully that doesn't take more than half an hour just to go through it. If there's any questions or comments that people have as we're going through it, hopefully we can engage in some discussion. I'll also say the secret word sometime during this video. It's in the presentation, and that'll give you the attendance credit for this week. Remember, if you sign the attendance sheet during this time period between now and 1:30, then you'll get the live attendance credit for this week. And then if you sign the attendance sheet at any other time with the secret word, then you'll get the normal weekly attendance credit. Does anyone have any questions before we begin? There's only a couple of people here. Yeah.
Professor, if you missed the quiz from the first week and the second week, you can make it up by doing extra stuff like signing in and doing other extra things, correct?
You can make up the points, yes,
Okay.
by doing other things. There was no quiz in the first week, so you didn't miss the quiz that week.
Okay, but the second week I saw it was today's the 19th, so it was the 12th, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. Quizzes are usually due on Friday nights. The quiz is open 2 weeks before it's due, and all the quizzes are online, so you should be able to complete them ahead of time.
Okay,
But,
good.
Good. So I'm going to go ahead and start up the presentation and go over the material, but I have a tendency to get lost in the material as I go, so please interrupt me if you have anything to say, if you have anything to add. Also, there's the group chat on the side, and I'll be watching that also. Let me go ahead and jump into the presentation. All right. Let me see if I can find chat. Okay, well, okay. Oh, wait here. Here's chat. Okay. All right. Here we go. So this is lesson 3. This is week 3. We're done with our basic introduction of engineering and values and ethics. This week we're going to do one of our first major case studies, the Ford Pinto. And we're going to be talking about the Pinto with respect to the first major ethical theory that we'll cover this semester, which is consequentialism. We'll end up covering 3 ethical theories: consequentialism, which deals with the consequences of our actions. Deontology is the second theory we'll get to, and I think we get to that in week 5, or maybe week 6. Week 5. Deontology is, you might understand deontology as duty theory. It's a theory about what our obligations and our duties are, as opposed to our consequences. So deontologists will sometimes think that we have certain kinds of moral obligations and moral duties that hold despite negative consequences, so that you still have even if there are negative consequences. And we'll see an example of that later on in the lesson today. So the three big ethical theories are consequentialism, deontology, and then virtue ethics is the last one. That's Aristotle's view. Virtue ethics is different from the other two in that both consequentialism and deontology are usually understood as act-based theories. In other words, they're deciding whether a single action is right or wrong, good or bad. And virtue ethics is a little bit different because it looks at the characters of a person. So it doesn't look at whether an action is right or wrong, but it looks at whether a person is a good person or a bad person. It's probably dependent on their actions, but it's looking at several actions over time and understanding sometimes good people make bad decisions. Virtue ethics is looking at the character of full people understood in their entirety. Whereas consequentialism and deontology, the first 2 ethical theories, are really just looking at particular actions. So this week we're talking about consequentialism. Consequentialism is the view that an ethical theory can be evaluated with respect to its actions, can be evaluated for its value, whether an action is good or bad, right or wrong, that a decision can be made by evaluating the consequences of the decision. So consequentialism goes by lots of different names. If you've ever done a cost-benefit analysis, if you ever looked at the pros and cons of a decision, like wrote out a list of pros and wrote out a list of cons for difficult choices, like when you're deciding what college to go to, you might have a couple of different colleges in mind. You might write out the pros and cons of each one, decide on the basis of this by weighing the alternatives. This idea of weighing alternatives is quintessentially a consequentialist position. Deontologists who believe that there are duties tend to believe that those duties hold regardless of the situation. So there's no alternatives to weigh. There's sort of the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. Whereas consequentialists have a sort of a flexible view. They don't hold that there's any particular actions you should or shouldn't do. Right? A consequentialist would never say something like stealing is wrong, because sometimes stealing might be the right thing to do, and it depends on what the consequences are. So the consequentialist is very clear that you always need to look at the consequences of an action to see whether it's right or wrong. Cost-benefit analysis, weighing the alternatives. The catchphrase I use here is maximizing the good, or the consequentialists are interested in maximizing the good, or doing what is good. This is going to be distinguished from deontology, which tends to look at what's right instead of what's just merely good. And the virtue ethicists look at what's best as opposed to what's right or what's good. This is a little abstract. We can make it a little more concrete by looking at a particular kind of consequentialism. This is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the most popular form of consequentialism, although there's other kinds of consequentialism, as we'll see in a little bit. But utilitarians argue that there's a particular consequence that matters, not just all the consequences, but a particular consequence that has to do with the happiness caused. The idea that in the utilitarians is that agents are the sentient creatures. Sentient creatures are creatures that can feel pain and pleasure. So if you're sentient, what it means to be sentient is that you have a capacity for sensation. Sentient means that you can sense things, and in particular, that you can sense pain and pleasure. And the idea is that pleasure for a sentient creature is good, and pain for a sentient creature is bad, generally. If you want to do what's good for the creature, you will try to make them happy. So you try to maximize their happiness. Right? Sentient creatures normally pursue their own goods, their own pleasures. So if that's what all the agents are doing anyway, is pursuing their goods, then the best thing to do in general is to pursue the greatest good for the greatest number. So anything that you can do to raise the general happiness, right, to cause the most happiness or to cause the least suffering, if you can minimize suffering, if you can maximize happiness, then you're acting as a utilitarian. Right? Whatever causes the greatest good for the greatest number, right? Not just your own personal happiness, but the general happiness for all the things that can be happy. Right? So if you do something that causes you a little bit of happiness but causes other people a great deal of suffering, then that would be bad. Even though you end up a little bit happier, a lot of other people suffer. And the utilitarian view is that the overall consequences should be viewed, the total happiness. How does this affect the overall happiness? Just a little bit of a theoretical point. By happiness, we don't just mean pleasure, or at least you have to understand pleasure in a particular way. So it's not just hedonistic pleasure. It's not just something that feels good. You might think of happiness here more in terms of something like well-being or health. Right? What's healthy for the agent? Agents don't always pursue what's best for them, what's the most healthy. But the idea is that they want what's good for them, what makes them happy in the general sense. So not the hedonistic sense. Hedonism is about sort of physical pain and pleasures, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The utilitarian is not saying that we should just go after sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That might feel good, but it's not always best for you. The utilitarian wants to say that we want happiness in a more elevated sense, in the sense of maybe well-being. So we should cause the most well-being for the greatest number, the least amount of suffering that we can. It might even be easiest to understand utilitarianism as not just trying to maximize happiness, but trying to minimize suffering. That maybe suffering is even more important than happiness. That anytime suffering exists, we want to get rid of it. Okay, so that's a version of utilitarianism. There's other versions of utilitarianism there's other versions of consequentialism that take things other than happiness or pleasure to be the most important good. But utilitarianism is the most popular of these views, most widely shared by the philosophers. And philosophers like to use the trolley experiment, the trolley problem, as an example to motivate consequentialism. So the trolley problem, this is a thought experiment. This is a hypothetical experiment. And the point of this experiment is to see what factors weigh into our decision-making, how we make decisions, and what our intuitions are about what should weigh into our decision-making. So the trolley problem, imagine a trolley. These people are tied up, but don't think of them as tied up. Just imagine a trolley barreling down a track, and it's out of control. And it's barreling towards 5 people, and the 5 people just happen to be standing on the tracks. Don't imagine that they're tied up. Imagine that they just don't know that the trolley's coming for them. They're tourists, and they're looking at a map, and they don't see the tracks underneath them. They don't see the trolley coming. And the trolley is barreling down. The brakes are out, so the trolley can't stop. It's going to kill these 5 people, unless you, who are standing at this intersection right next to the lever, and you see that this is all happening. You see that the trolley is going to kill these 5 people, and you see that you have control over this lever that will divert the trolley from its original path onto this side path. If the trolley is diverted onto the side path, it'll miss these 5 people, so those 5 people will survive. But it'll kill one other person who happens to be standing on the side path, also not paying attention. In this image, the people are tied up, but don't pay attention to that. Just imagine that they're there and they're sort of innocent bystanders. So the trolley problem asks, do you pull the lever? Right. So the trolley will kill 5 people unless you pull the lever. If you pull the lever, then it'll kill this one person. So the question is, do you pull the lever? There's one person in the room right now listening. I'm going to upload this video later, so hopefully other people will watch. But I don't know, Glenn, if you have any thoughts. Do you pull the lever to save 5 people, even though it means killing 1?
See, I mean, since it's a philosophy class, I think it's more than that. It's because you're saving 5 people versus 1 person, but I think it gets into what you believe too. It could be, for example, religion. Let's say morally, it's better to kill those 5 people for some religious reason than that 1 person. There's different factors. So in this example, without, no variables and stuff, you want to save the most people as possible. So you let the trolley run over that first the 1 person. But then when you see in factors, which I don't want to make this class overcomplicated, which it does get overcomplicated.
Yeah, I mean, the point of this class is to complicate these things, is to think about all the different complications.
Then you have to, you have to look at your factors. Yeah, I guess then you have to weigh your factors in.
So what kind of factors might matter here?
Well, I mentioned religion, what you believe in. If you believe in that, let's say, or not even religion, what's another thing? Let's say those 5 people. Okay, how about this? I know this is morally, this is wrong, but if it was a race, if that 1 person was, in your belief, was believed to be a superior race over those 5 people, in that belief, those 5 people will get run over. Right. So that's just one example.
Yeah, good. So if you have racist beliefs and you don't like the race of the 5 people, but you like you don't like the race of the 1 person, but you like the race of 5 people, right? So that might factor into your decision. Religious beliefs, like you said, might factor into your decision. What about the identity of these people? What if this person's your mother? If the 1 person is your mother and it's 5 just random people, do you pull the lever and kill your mother to save 5 people?
Obviously, there has to be more to the situation. It's more complicated than that.
Right.
I mean,
you might be able to just yell at everyone, "Hey, get out of the way!"
You could go both ways.
Yeah.
I mean, if you to bring in fiction, you just be Batman and save everyone. You never get yourself into that situation then. So.
Right. You're Spider-Man. You build a big web that stops the trolley or something. Right. Yeah. So don't feel. So in the discussion in the forum, don't feel nervous about doing some of these variations and testing. Part of the point of the trolley experiment is to test our intuitions about what matters. So how do different features, if you tweak it, and we'll look at some variations of the trolley problem in a second. But the point of the trolley problem is just to make this basic consequentialist claim that the numbers matter. So if we think that losing a human life is the worst kind of, right, is the maximum suffering that an individual can have, well, here we have 5 individuals losing their life versus 1 individual losing their life. If it's just 5 versus 1, 5 versus 1, 5 is a bigger number than 1. So if you just on the numbers there, the consequentialist is going to say you should pull the lever. You should save the 5 to leave the 1. Doesn't matter what your background beliefs is, doesn't matter religious beliefs or anything else. Just from a simple numbers perspective, is it better that 5 people suffer versus 1 person suffering? The consequentialist is going to say just those numbers suggest that you ought to pull the lever. You minimize suffering, you maximize happiness by killing 1 person to save the 5. Even though that 1 person wouldn't have died anyway, right? If you had done nothing, that 1 person would have survived. So, yeah.
Another situation, let's say they were criminals. So then it's like, who do I say, the 5 or the 1 and stuff? And let's say they're all bad and stuff.
Yeah.
See, now it's that's just a variable. It's like, well, in that case, well.
Yeah, or if they committed different crimes, like imagine the 5 were all non-violent drug offenders, but 1 person was like a serial killer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In this case, you might feel more comfortable pulling the lever, right? So now in each of these variations, we're talking about who these people are and your sort of special relationship to them. If they're your mother, if you're racist and they're your preferred race or whatever. The consequentialist thinks that these special relationships shouldn't matter. What matters is the overall suffering, the happiness on the one hand, or the pleasure on the one hand, or the suffering on the other hand. And the consequentialist is going to say that 1 human suffering is the same as any other human suffering, right? There's no difference between people in suffering. So it doesn't matter if the person is a serial killer, because he's still suffering the same as anyone else is suffering, right? And causing anyone suffering is bad, right? This is the consequentialist view, right? Is that suffering is bad no matter who it exists and no matter where it exists. So even though it's a serial killer suffering, that shouldn't change your relationship, right? If the goal is to maximize happiness and minimize suffering, then we should also want to stop the suffering of a serial killer. And the fact that it's your mother, right? You might think that you'd want to kill 5 people to save your mother, but that's 5 deaths versus 1 death. The consequentialist is going to say, those other 5 people are related to someone else, right? So other people are going to be sad that those 5 people are going to die. Just because you feel especially sad about your mom dying doesn't mean that it's less suffering to save your mom and kill the 5 people. In fact, you might think it's 5 times more suffering if those 5 people die versus your mom. So even though you might want to save your mother, the consequentialist is going to say there's no moral justification for that because you're causing 5 times more suffering on average by killing 5 people than not killing your mom. So the consequentialist is going to say that you have a moral obligation to kill your mother in the trolley problem. Now, a lot of people don't find that very convincing. A lot of people think that, no, I have an obligation to protect my mother, even if it means killing a lot of other people or letting a lot of other people die. And the point here is that kind of justification can't be a consequentialist justification, right? It's not because of the consequences that you have this duty to protect your mother. There must be some other source. So this is why the deontologists are going to reject the consequentialist view. The consequentialists think it's just a matter of the numbers. Just if you just add up the numbers on both sides, you'll be able to reason out. In my class earlier today, one of the students suggested that, well, look, if I pull the lever, then I'm responsible for killing that 1 guy. But if I don't pull the lever, then I didn't do anything. I didn't intervene on the problem, so it's not my responsibility that those other 5 people died. It's their fault for being on the track, right? It's not my fault because I didn't do anything. I didn't pull a lever. I didn't do anything at all. I just stood there. But the consequentialist is...
Professor,
yeah.
Even we have what I believe, and even if you didn't pull a lever, you're still making a choice not to pull a lever. You still understood that in that case, it may seem cowardly because you're just trying to avoid yourself. You're trying to make yourself. You're trying to what it's called, justify yourself.
That's right.
You still are making a choice. So.
Yeah, and I think this is a very important point, that you're making a choice even though you didn't do anything, right? You didn't take any action, but not taking an action in a case like this when you could have taken an action to prevent some wrongdoing, not taking an action makes you morally culpable. The fact that you didn't do anything, that's part of the problem in this case. It's part of what makes you morally responsible. So imagine that I'm standing next to a kiddie pool, and there's a little child in the kiddie pool, and the child's drowning. And it would take no effort at all for me to lift the child out of the pool, prevent it from drowning. But I don't do anything. I just stand there and watch the child drown. If I'm just standing there watching the child drown, then I'm responsible for that child drowning, even though I didn't do anything. And the same idea here in the trolley problem is that if you don't pull the lever, then in some sense you're responsible for those 5 people dying because you could have prevented it. At least this is how the consequentialist is going to reason about this. So not taking an action might be as bad as taking an action. And then all these particular reasons we have for taking action about our special relationships with these people, the consequentialist is going to tell us that these things might not be the ultimate concern. What might just matter is how many people live and die, just the numbers. Okay, so again, the point of this is to get us to start thinking about our intuitions for how we make these difficult decisions. And there are tons of variations of this trolley problem. Philosophers have been talking about this trolley problem for like 40 years. So there's lots of different variations. Some of them are really clever, some of them are kind of silly. I would strongly recommend going to Facebook, to the Trolley Problems meme page on Facebook, because there's a lot of great variations there. Let me talk about a couple of variations. So this is the Fat Man version. So in the Fat Man version, there's same basic setup. There's this trolley barreling towards these 5 people. It's going to kill these 5 people. But in this case, instead of standing next to a lever to divert the trolley. There's no lever in this case. The trolley is only on these 1 tracks. But you are standing next to a fat man, a very fat man, and the fat man just happens to be leaning over in such a way that it would take very little effort to push him so that he falls in the tracks. And because you're an engineer, you can spot that the man is heavy enough to stop the trolley before it actually hits the people. Now in this case, again, a person's going to die. The fat man's probably going to die from getting hit by the trolley, but you would still save those 5 other people's lives. And let's just for the sake of argument, imagine that you can calculate all this, and you know with a high degree of certainty that the fat man will die, the 5 people will be saved. Do you push the fat man? I don't know if you want to try to answer this, Glenn, or I can just keep talking.
I'm sorry, but I was actually paying to the picture below with the 1-year-old baby and then the 90. With that, kind of thinking of the fat man, but even going with this, I would believe, and let's say I knew, like I said, let's say I knew all of them, all the 90 men. If they live their lives, and personally, if I know them, all of them, and they're okay with dying. And I know I'm bringing in a lot of factors to it, but then you're going to bring in the factor, what if you only have 2 seconds to decide and you don't have time, you don't know them and stuff? Well, then that's just complicating the thing and stuff. But like with the old, I probably would go with option B, to kill. They had time. They had time to decide. They had time to make their choice. Now, what's it called? They're going with it. Like, they're getting cut off.
Yeah. Good. So do you have any intuitions about the fat man? Do you push the fat man?
The fat man compared to the regular people?
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, 2 ways if I go about it. I push the fat man, I save the people. Yeah, you have that. You saved all 5 people. Because you're now, this is bringing out people are kind of not prejudiced, but another word for it, like, oh, people don't like fat people, so of course I'm gonna sacrifice the fat man because it makes sense. Yeah,
that's one of the troubles with this example. The point is it's not that the fat man deserves to die because he's
not. Yeah.
The point is just that the fat man's big enough to stop the trolley, right? So it's another way of stopping the trolley. Now, here's the thing. The fat man case from a consequentialist perspective, is exactly the same as the original trolley case. It's one person dying versus 5 people dying, right? If we're just looking at number of deaths, the numbers are exactly the same. But there's a really big difference with the fat man psychologically, and that's you actually have to push the guy. You actually have to touch him with your hands, and it's a direct result of your touching his body.
You're still making a choice. I still understand that you're choosing to push the fat man to stop the train to save the people, or you're choosing not to push the fat man to save him and let the other people sacrifice the 5 people. I definitely understand that. It's just
well, I mean, so the big difference is it's not just that you have to sacrifice the person, but from in the original trolley experiment, you're also sacrificing a person by pulling the lever.
Yeah.
The difference here with the fat man versus the original case is that it's still one person dying versus 5 people dying, but in the original, you're pulling a lever and you're kind of far away from the person that dies. And so there's this sort of emotional distance between the action that you take and the person that dies. Whereas with the fat man, you're the one that's actually shoving him onto the tracks. So when you do experiments, when you ask people, when you do surveys to ask people how they would respond, most people, the majority of people, say that they would pull the lever, but the majority of people say they would not push the fat man. So,
okay, personally, me, and then this is based on me because everyone else is different. Pulling the lever, is the same thing as pushing the fat man. You're still making I don't care if I'm across the half, if I'm on another planet and I'm still detonating a bomb to kill somebody, it's the same thing as going up to them and killing them in my personally. So if I was all right pulling the lever, then I would be all right pushing the fat man. Not everyone is strong enough because they're like, oh, well, I can hide. No. There is no hiding. If I'm doing something, I'm doing it 100%.
Yeah, but you're right. It's hard for people. A lot of people don't see how that's consistent in that way. In fact, a lot of people say differently. So this is from the optional readings at the very end. But I just wanted to mark this here. Peter Singer is one of the famous utilitarians. He's defended utilitarian views for a long time. He also gives utilitarian arguments that we shouldn't eat meat on the basis of, he gives vegetarian arguments. He says, the pleasure that meat causes me as a meat eater is much, much less than the suffering caused by the animal being eaten, right? So just on a strict utilitarian basis, it doesn't make any sense. Right? My little bit of pleasure from eating a steak versus the death of the cow, which is a lot of suffering for the cow, and all the factory farming issues that it had to deal with during its life, its short little miserable life, right? So it has this completely miserable, suffering life, and I get an hour's worth of pleasurable meal out of it, and it seems like that's not balanced. It seems like I get too little pleasure for the amount of suffering required. So a consequentialist argument for vegetarianism. But Singer also gives another consequentialist argument about charity work. And given some of the very same things that we've talked about already, he says he uses these to argue that we ought to be giving a lot more to charity than we normally do. I mean, so imagine, I was talking earlier about the child drowning in a kiddie pool standing right next to me. It would be very simple for me to lift that child out of the pool so that they're not drowning. But now imagine that I told you, well, I don't want to save that kid because I have these really nice shoes on, really expensive shoes, suede shoes. I really like these shoes. They're really nice. They're really comfortable.
Not to interrupt you, but I think that's a poor example. I mean, just to, again, not to, blow your story off, but can I give an example real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
My example would be, so you have the little kid in the kiddie pool, and it just takes you, minimal effort just to save him and stuff. Versus now you have a kid in the middle of the ocean, and in order to save him, you have to, you may or you may not to, but it's probably 99% sure you have to give up your life just to save that kid. Mm-hmm. What do you do?
Yeah, so that's a much harder question, whether you give up your life to save the kid. Saving that kid in the middle of the ocean would be a lot more difficult just on its own. You'd need boats and stuff to save them.
Because no offense, the suede shoes, what? Worst case scenario, go steal another pair of suede shoes.
Right.
Problem solved.
Yeah, so good. So it looks silly to say that I don't want to save the kid for the sake of my shoes. It seems like the shoes, no matter how nice they are, it seems the shoes aren't even comparable to a human life. Maybe it's a much harder decision to decide whether I give my own life to save a child. That's a very hard decision to make because that's a life for a life. And it's my life, right? So these are very hard decisions to make. But it seems no contest whatsoever if it's my shoes versus a child. Who cares about a pair of shoes? Even a really nice pair of shoes, doesn't matter how nice they are. So Singer says, so it seems obvious that I should give up my shoes if it's very easy to save this child right next to me. And then Singer says, but now think about all the money that you spend on nice things for yourself, nice clothes, nice the video game that you want to buy is expensive. You spend all this money on yourself for the pleasure that it causes, right? The entertainment value. You want to look nice, this kind of stuff. But you don't need any of these things to survive. And it would be very easy for you to give up, that extra pair of shoes or that extra video game and instead donate that money to charity, where a charitable organization can use that same money, that $60 that you spent on a video game or that $100 you spent on shoes, can use that same money to feed a family for a month. Right? And if the choice is between feeding a family for a month or you playing that video game, it seems obvious that that money should go to the family who need it to eat. Right? In the same way that it seems obvious that I should not let the child die for the sake of my shoes. Well, every time I buy a pair of shoes, that's money that could go to save a starving family around the world. So it seems obvious that I should give up my shoes to save the child next to me when I could also use that money to save, every time I buy a pair of shoes, I can use that money to save another child around the world. The only difference in these cases, it's not how easy it is. It's very easy to give money to charity. The only difference in these cases is that the children are far away from me and I don't see their suffering, whereas I can see the child drowning right next to me. But on a consequentialist view, this distance shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter how far away they are. It doesn't matter what mediates the two. All that matters is that they're suffering. So the fact that you spend money on yourself for these sort of trivial things, when that money could go to charity, Peter Singer says this is unethical, and that we act unethically every time we spend money on unnecessary things for ourselves. It's a hard argument. Singer says that we should be giving up most of our money to charity because most of the money we don't need for ourselves. Most of the money we waste on trivial things. Not that we should hurt ourselves, right? We shouldn't make ourselves suffer for the sake of others. Right? He doesn't want to increase the suffering in the world. But the minimal amount of pleasure that I get from these little creature comforts, a new pair of shoes. Right? My old shoes will work fine. It's just that they're out of fashion. And so I buy a new pair of shoes because I want to be trendy and I want to look well-dressed. But I don't need that stuff to survive. And I could give that up and make do a lot more good somewhere else. So this is just something to think about. This is one of the optional readings. If you're interested in this kind of thing and want to talk about charity and morality.
His argument. I mean, I understand if you going back to his argument. I understand. Yeah, you have to give into charity is good, and I think it's just more than a feel good. The benefit of feeling good because you did some good to someone. I think it's to help you too. It's to help you. I know this is going probably to your first lesson. What's the whole point of ethics? Personally, it's good versus bad, and that's another viewpoint. But it's am I going to do good or am I going to do bad, and then what are my reasons for it and stuff. So it personally, like for me, he says, okay, giving to charity, we should give more to charity. Okay, I agree with that. But there's also a point where, hey, I'm also going to support myself. If I do have a family, I'm also going to support them because I'm not going to have my family starve and then give to charity. I'm like, I love my family too. I can also love someone else too by giving what is, how do you say this? I guess what you can give, you should give. If you can't give it, then don't give it and stuff. Don't, I'm losing words with this, but don't like, I don't want to say don't act stupid, but don't use your head in a way, I guess. So with the eating thing you brought up about being a vegetarian and versus eating meat, personally, if I went over someone's house, friend's house, and they didn't have any vegetables and they just had meat, and I knew we were going to eat meat, and let's say in some cultures, it is disrespectful not to eat at someone's place because it shows disrespect. So in order just to have someone to show respect to someone, just to eat, meat, I'll eat that meat, not to show that disrespect. There was another instance about eating. So then in the other thing, if I have friends that are vegetarian stuff or family, and I know that it really, really disturbs them for me to eat meat, or especially just even I can eat meat, but not around them, I don't mind following that. So,
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to please everyone. I'm not trying to do that, but I can, personally, people may not be, no, I have to eat, like, it may be a problem with people, but for me personally, I don't have a problem. It's like, hey, if you don't want me to eat, we won't be eating here, just to, benefit you and stuff.
Yeah, I think these are good points. Part of what I'm hearing in your comments is that there's social factors about how we eat and how we share food that matter a lot, and not just whether an animal is suffering. I mean, part of the consequentialist view is that it's really the suffering, pain and pleasure, that's really the important issue. And if you think these social dynamics are also important, then maybe there's other ways of deciding this. One other thing I wanted to say, just you said that people should give what they have. It's interesting that, in fact, that's not how giving actually works. If you look at how people...
No, it doesn't.
No. Okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
So it turns out that people who have less tend to give a lot more than people who have more.
It's easy. So, it's much easier.
It's much easier.
It's when you have less, you can. The whole point of giving, it's not a feel-good thing. It's a way of living. It's like, hey, I have 100% of my thing. When I look at my percent, if I'm making $20,000 a year, if I just need $2,000, that's 10% to live on for my personal, like for food, shelter, just for me physically to survive. And what's it called? I live in a society today where I need to be making more by other people's standard. I can give that away because I'm already below people's standards. It's that judgment. I'm not held to that judgment. So I don't need to, there's no need to make more money in a way. I'm happy where I'm at. I'm happier as a poor person versus a person who's making a multi-million dollars, but who has to handle all this stress about just of money. And some people love money so much, which me personally, I don't. I know I need money to support things, but I don't love money where I need to give up my time and I guess love towards it. So that personally, I think it's easier for poor people to give. So.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, poor people do tend to give more as a percentage of their income. Not in total dollars, but as a percentage of their income, they tend to give far more, something like 15%. Rich people tend to give far, far less of their income as a percentage. So you would think that if you have more to give, you would give more away, but it turns out that if you have less to give, and I think you're right that it's a cultural thing, a culture of giving and a culture of sharing, more common at the bottom. Good. So that was just a little brief aside on the Peter Singer stuff. There are more variations of the trolley problem. Here's the hedonist trolley problem. The track is heading towards B. If you pull the lever, you'll save 5 people. You'll kill 1. We also won't do this totally sick loop-to-loop. So how do you decide there? This is all on the Facebook trolley problems meme. There's lots of different variations of these. Do you kill the 5 first and then the 1, or the 1 first and then the 5? Okay.
So if you're already dead, then it's all point. So, it doesn't matter. So.
Yeah. So talk about these different variations and sort of test your intuitions out, see how they work. But the point of this, there's a serious point behind this, and it comes out when we talk about the Pinto case. So we'll see in the Pinto case a form of consequentialist reasoning, and we'll see how that works. So let me go ahead and just introduce the Pinto case really quickly. So Pinto, Ford compact economy car, built in the 70s. 1971 is the first version of it. Compact economy car. This is the sort of first round of economy cars. In the early 70s, this is when Japanese automakers and other Asian automakers were starting to become good at making these really cheap, efficient cars. And so Ford and other American car companies wanted to try to match this price point and make these really fuel-efficient, lightweight, cheap cars. So Lee Iacocca was the CEO of Ford at the time, and the Pinto was called Lee's car because he was the one really pushing for it, and he was pushing for no more than 2,000 pounds, no more than $2,000. And one of the phrases he said quite often was "safety doesn't sell." By the way, this is the secret word for this week: safety. If you use the word safety in the sign-in sheet, you'll get attendance credit for today. So safety doesn't sell. Because any safety measures they took would raise the weight, it would raise the cost of the car beyond the price point that Lee Iacocca wanted. So anytime anybody came up with safety issues, he just ignored them. And there were safety issues with the Ford. In fact, it was known that they would explode during during even low-speed collisions from the rear. So here's a little YouTube video going over the discussion. Yeah, so there was the fuel tank was right in the back of the car, right up against the rear fender. So if there was any kind of low-speed collision, the rear fender would puncture the gas tank and spill gasoline everywhere, and if there were any sparks, it would blow up in a fireball. Here's a rear collision at 35 miles an hour. You'll see what happens. This is at 35 miles an hour. The engineers found that these same collision fireballs would happen at speeds down to 20 miles an hour. This is low-speed collisions, residential area kind of collisions. Yeah, so there's the fireball. Anything that would puncture the gas tank, 35 miles an hour, the bigger the speed would obviously be worse collision. Not only would it puncture the rear gas tank and cause this fireball, but it would crumple the sides of the car so that the doors would jam. So you would basically be stuck inside as this thing was burning. And in fact, it burned a couple of people alive from accidents exactly like this. Ford was eventually put on trial for manslaughter for reckless endangerment, the homicide. The first time that a corporation, a non-human, had ever been tried for killing another human being. We'll see eventually that Ford was found not guilty of reckless endangerment, but we'll get there in a second. Okay, so the Pintos would cause these rear explosions. Ford engineers knew that the parts would cause these explosions. Not only did they knew that these explosions would be caused, but they even had the patent for the parts that it would take to fix all the cars. But putting that part on the car would raise it over 2,000 pounds, would cost more than $2,000, and so Lee Iacocca just wasn't interested. In fact, they were rushing to get this car out to market so fast that the way that this development process usually works is that you design the car and then you test the car in all sorts of conditions just to make sure that the car is sound and safe. And then once you know that the car has been safely tested, then you start production run. You produce a bunch of this. But they wanted this car as fast as possible, so they did the testing and the production in parallel. So they had the design, they started producing it, and had produced 12 million cars by the time that they realized that there was this safety issue. Now again, they knew the safety issue, they knew the part that would take to fix it. It would have cost $11 to fix this car. A little metal plate that you put on the back of the gas tank that would prevent the fender from puncturing the gas tank. It would cost $11, about $65 today, but really a small piece of the overall cost of the car. So they knew about all this before they even put the Pinto into production.
Wait, it only costs $11 to fix the car?
Yeah, $11 metal shield on the gas tank would have prevented, at least during the very low-speed collisions.
And would that have still been under $2,000?
No, it would have been slightly more than $2,000. It would have been like $2,000, $2,011, and it would have been
So, okay.
and it would have been slightly more than 2,000 pounds. It was a metal, a piece of steel, so it would have weighed a little bit also. Okay, but Ford engineers knew about this, and in fact, there were meetings at Ford where they discussed this in great amount of detail. And in 1977, so the Pinto had already been out for 6 years, but in 1977, Mark Dowie, who was an investigative journalist at Mother Jones, got his hands on what came to be called the Pinto Memo, which was an internal memo that was used by Ford, and Ford was sending to some of the government regulators, where they did a cost-benefit analysis. And on the one hand, they weighed the $11 per vehicle times the 12.5 million vehicles that had already been produced. This is how much it would cost to fix all the vehicles on the road, to fix all the cars so that they wouldn't explode. It would cost $137 million. On the other hand, if we just let the cars out into the world, knowing that some people are going to die, and then we calculate how much it would cost to pay off those people in court for settlements, Ford decided that it would be about 180 burn deaths and another 180 burn injuries, with about $200,000 paid off per death and about $67,000 per injury, and then plus the damages to the cars. Adding all that together, it cost about $50 million. So Ford decided that the cost to safely fix a vehicle at $137 million was more than the cost to pay off the survivors at $50 million. And so Ford decided that it wasn't even a decision. It was too expensive to fix the vehicles. So they decided to let the cars out, and in fact, they did kill people. There's some dispute over how many people that were killed, but there were definitely people killed by exploding Pintos. This is from the Mark Dowie article. The cost-benefit analysis, Ford argued, cost-benefit analysis argued that Ford should not make an $11 per car improvement that would prevent 180 fiery deaths a year. The memo argued there is no financial benefit in complying with the proposed safety standards that would admittedly result in fewer auto fires, burn deaths, and fewer burn injuries. Right, so Ford decided that they were willing to shoulder the cost to them personally of 180 burn deaths a year because it would have been more expensive to fix all those cars. This is a great example of consequentialist reasoning, cost-benefit reasoning, where the issue here is just the financial bottom line, right? How much in dollars does it cost Ford? And that's their only concern here. And they decided that from a financial perspective, it wasn't worth fixing the cars. That in order to save money, they were willing to tolerate 180 unnecessary deaths a year. Now, this understandably caused a huge public outcry. The public was furious at this. And because of the public outcry, when Ford went to trial, the cost of death, Ford was being sued for something like $20 million, per death. So way beyond what Ford was estimating. In fact, if they had given more reasonable costs of a human life, I mean, they were estimating that it cost about $200,000 per human life. And part of the interesting thing, and part of the reason that they weren't convicted for this, was that this figure wasn't their own figure, but this was a government figure, a government for insurance purposes, where they were trying to figure out how much to pay, how much for insurance purposes a human life was worth. They estimated about $200,000. In court, you can sue someone for a lot more than $200,000 for the death of a person. And nowadays, this figure is much higher. And if Ford had put a much higher figure for the cost of a human life, then maybe this cost-benefit analysis would have gone a different way. So a utilitarian is going to look at this and say that this is not an example of utilitarian reasoning. It's an example of consequentialist reasoning. They're looking at consequences, but the consequences they're concerned with are financial consequences to Ford, and they're not concerned with consequences to anyone else in anything other than dollar value. But a utilitarian is going to say it's not just the money that matters. The cost of a human life is worth much more than the money, right? And so the $180 people that would die from this is worth far more than the $137 million that it might cost to fix the vehicle. Maybe people would be willing to pay more than $2,000 for a Pinto if they knew that it wouldn't explode. This is the real consequences of the Ford Pinto case. Nowadays, safety is a concern, and car manufacturers often put up their safety ratings as an example of why you should buy their car, right? Safety does sell. In fact, safety is very important for the consumer nowadays. And the reason it is now this way was partly because of, in the past, things like the Pinto, when safety wasn't a concern either for the consumer or for the manufacturer. And so all these dangerous vehicles got on the road, and there was huge cost to life. So nowadays, we think safety is really important, and safety is a big feature of cars. While we're on the subject, it's worth mentioning that cars kill a lot of people every year. Over 30,000 people every year die of auto accidents. That's 30,000 human lives every year that we are willing to tolerate just disappearing because we like the convenience of the road. We would rather have the convenience of a car and let 30,000 people die than change things about this basic safety. And 30,000 people dying per year on car accidents, this is a historic low. Back at the peak in the 70s when the Pinto was out, in the 70s and 80s, when there were almost no safety regulations governing these cars, we were losing something like 50,000 people a year to car deaths. There were a lot fewer cars on the road also, so that was a much bigger percentage of cars ending in fatal accidents. So this trend downwards here is almost entirely a technological improvement, right? We have a lot. It's not that we've stopped people from driving. In fact, there's a lot more people driving today than there were in the 70s. But our cars are radically more safe than they were in the 70s. Let's see. Yeah. So. So this is a front end crash of a modern car with all the modern safety features and an old 1950. Yes, this is a 2009 Chevy Malibu. This is 1959 Chevy Bel Air. You might hear people today talk about how these old cars were built like a tank, out of real steel and stuff. But in fact, these old cars were death machines, killed lots of people. In this kind of wreck, you were not going to survive this kind of car accident. The whole the 59 Bel Air, it just completely crumples, and it crumples in a way that's stupidly dangerous. So you can see that steering column just shoved right into the person's face, right? There's no bags or anything to protect them, right? The whole front end just completely collapses on the person. That steering column goes right into their face, right? That person's dead. There's no concern here about safety. Almost all the concerns here are about style. How stylish was it? How slick does it look? But those cars were death machines. Whereas if you look at the 2009 Malibu, the whole way that the car is designed is a little container so that everything sits and gets compact, right? So that's part of the point of the airbags, is that it blows up so you aren't bouncing around so much. There's a big pillow in front of you. And the whole passenger car is self-contained. So this thing can get into a pretty nasty crash, and you might get some broken bones. You might break your legs, especially the bottom parts of the car is less well preserved. But the top part of the car, you might break your collarbone on the safety belt. But these machines are designed to keep you safe. People still die of accidents all the time, but these cars are way more safe today than they were in the past. Yeah, Glenn.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Okay.
You're just saying, with modern technology now, it's saving lives, which is so.
So it's partly a change in the technology, but there's also this change in culture where both from a consumer standpoint and from an industrial standpoint, we recognize that safety really matters. It matters for what kinds of things the consumers want. It matters for whether they buy our products again or whether our products look cheap and trashy. Okay. There's a lot more to say about the Pinto case, and next week, in fact, we're going to read an essay by the guy whose job it was to make this decision. Dennis Joya, he was the recall coordinator. He was the guy who was looking at the Ford explosions. He was seeing all these reports of people dying, and it was his job to decide whether to do a recall. And he decided not to do a recall, and he will explain his decision in this essay that we'll read next week. So we'll have a lot more to say about the Pinto. For this week, you might just think about how this compares to how Ford's decision-making process and the cost-benefit analysis they did, how it compares to other kinds of utilitarian analysis. Is there ways of giving a utilitarian analysis that comes to a different decision? Think about Ford's scope of ethical consideration, right? Who were they considering? What were the values that went into their design, went into their product? And maybe what values ought to be going into our products? I would like you, one thing that might be interesting to do is think about this quote, safety doesn't sell. Think about the ethics and values that it represents. Think about the kind of culture, the kind of corporate culture that it generates, right? If this is what the CEO is saying, how do the engineers and the field recall coordinators and so on, how do they start making decisions if that's the CEO's attitude? These are not easy questions. There's lots of meat here to sink your teeth into. So think about this.
You want me to start answering, or?
Oh no, this is. So I'm recording the video. I'm going to post the video for everyone else later on.
Okay.
So I was just raising this for general discussion. If you have anything to say, though,
I guess one thing to say is it is very sad how we do value money versus a human life. But that's with everything, from our food to what we drink. Yeah, it doesn't matter like who made it or how healthy it is for us. They make their money, and at the end of the day, they're okay with that. So.
Yeah, and we'll see even worse examples of the same kind of decision making. There's actually a danger in doing this kind of, where we look at these really terrible case studies, because one of the lessons that you might come away with is that people get away with this quite often. Ford got away with this. People still buy Ford cars today. We know that Ford makes these kinds of corporate decisions, and people are still loyal Ford customers today, even today. It's amazing. When we get to the BP oil spill, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, right? BP is still drilling in deep water, even though we know that they made these bad decisions that led to these huge environmental disasters. We're still giving them almost free rein to continue doing this kind of stuff. So
they're providing us oil. They, gas prices, they went down from how many years? What, 2000? When was it high? 2006 or?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
So $4 a gallon to less than $2. Well, $2 a gallon. That's a big difference. Apparently, that makes a big difference to people.
Right.
So.
And it makes more. It's just a bigger deal than the environmental damage that's being caused by the drilling or all the accidents that result. Yeah. So that's almost all I wanted to say. There's one more little bit just in the optional readings. I went over Peter Singer's thing. The other optional reading I have is this article on the title of the article is called "How Do Tobacco Executives Live with Themselves?" And what it looks at one of the tobacco lobbyists, a lawyer lobbyist whose job it was to convince government that tobacco products were safe and healthy, that tobacco products shouldn't be regulated. And the article was written in the 90s, and the 90s was when the big lawsuits happened. So up until the 90s, tobacco executives resisted any kind of regulation on tobacco products. And in fact, they systematically denied that tobacco is addictive. So
you don't have the sound on.
Oh, sorry. You can't hear the sound? Sorry. I don't know how to get the sound on. So I have this video on here. So these are all major executives from tobacco industry from different tobacco companies. In the 90s, Congress was able to get all of the tobacco executives before Congress to.
Professor, you have it on mute on YouTube.
I have the YouTube on mute. Yeah. When I tried to unmute it, I don't think the sound is going.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, so I don't think you can hear the sound from it either way. The video is on the Prezi though. You can watch it on the Prezi. So each one of these tobacco executives are saying across the board that they do not believe that tobacco is addictive, that they do not believe that nicotine is addictive, and they don't believe that there's any health consequences from smoking tobacco. Now, every one of these executives is lying, not just because they believe something that's false, but because they know all these tobacco companies had done their research, and they know very well that tobacco is addictive and it's unhealthy, that it kills people, that it's the primary cause for lung cancer. So they know these things, but saying that tobacco is addictive is bad for business. So every one of these executives are here in front of Congress, lying to Congress, saying that tobacco is not addictive. So this article that I share is from one of these lobbyists whose job it was to talk to government and try to get rid of these regulations. And the article is with this lobbyist who had just found out that he has cancer and has just gone through chemo. He dies a few weeks after, or a few months after this article. But it's him talking about how he's able to justify to himself his job, because he knows that he's lying to people, and he knows that he's selling a product that's killing people. And so he says, he's talking about the executives. He says they know, but they're able to supplement it, I'm convinced, because of the similar mentality that we lawyers all have. Freedom of choice is more important than anything. So this is the argument about smoking. Well, yes, smoking is dangerous, but people have the freedom to choose whether or not to smoke. And the argument is that the freedom to choose is more important than whether someone lives or dies. So this is an anti-consequentialist argument. This is an argument that the right to freely choose your products is more important than making sure that everyone lives. Because if our concern is just to make sure that everyone lives a healthy life, then we can just ban cigarettes. But some people argue that no, people should have the right to choose whether or not to smoke. Or people should have the right to choose how they live their lives. And that also means the choice to make bad decisions, to make stupid decisions that might kill you. So because we believe in the freedom of choice, the argument goes, then we think that people have the right to live less than healthy lives and maybe kill themselves unnecessarily. So this is a non-consequentialist argument. The argument is that there's some things more important than the consequences. Even if some people die, it's more important that we have the freedom to choose how we live. Now, this is the arguments that they make, but it's a very disingenuous argument, because tobacco, first of all, it's addictive. So the idea that people have a choice over whether to smoke is already rather questionable. But more important, tobacco companies have advertised aggressively for decades to get people addicted to their cigarettes so that they remain loyal customers until they die. Again, the cigarette companies know that this product is killing them slowly, but it's also very profitable. So they continue to advertise it, and they advertise it in all these disingenuous ways. In the 50s especially, it was very common to see advertisements where doctors recommend smoking particular cigarettes. Or here's a dentist saying, as a dentist, I would recommend Viceroys, where the consuming public is being told by medical professionals that their cigarettes are the better cigarettes. Again, these companies know that these products will kill you, but they're recommending them as the healthy, safer alternative. Not only marketing for medical professionals, marketing to children. This is the whole point of Joe Camel, is marketing to children. This is marketing to young teens, trying to addict them early. And back in the 50s and 60s, this stuff was everywhere. This is a old Flintstones commercial during the Flintstones, where they would pull out a pack of Winstons, smoke Winstons. The idea that this is free choice, when the tobacco industry is literally paying billions of dollars to advertise it, to get people addicted, and then their product creates a psychological, like a habit that they can't easily break themselves out of. The idea that this is a way of respecting free choice seems rather disingenuous. So I want to ask, I want you to think about this uh, it's a hard case because the tobacco industry hires a lot of people. In particular, they hire a lot of engineers to build other machines. If you get a job in the tobacco industry, it might be a very good job. It might pay well. Might have a lot of benefits. Is it ethical to work for the tobacco industry? Is it ethical to work for an industry that is producing a product that kills its customers and that everyone knows that kills its customers? This isn't an easy question.
This also reminds me of the movie Thank You for Smoking.
Yeah, that's right.
Myself, but someone told me about it, how it's just another viewpoint on the tobacco companies. But personally, since I don't smoke, and then that's my view, so that's another variable that plays in. I believe, I don't support it. So
yeah,
I just don't support it. I mean, I could go on how, my views and stuff, but at the end of the day, I just don't support it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So as an engineer, if I was to have a choice, I probably would just decline the job.
Yeah. But that's, it's really hard to decline. It's not an easy, and I don't want to say that that's always the right decision to make, because depending on your circumstances, if you're not getting any other job offers and that's the only job offer you have,
I would have to take the job then. But yeah, then
this is where it gets like a difficult decision.
It's a moral decision. If I am going to stand on what I believe, no, then I won't take the job. But like I said, if I'm okay, if I weigh my factors, that other view you're talking about, then it looks good. Hey, I'm making money. It's okay. I can still do it. This is with anything, drugs, alcohol, anything. So it provides for the family. It puts them through college and stuff. It's a sacrifice,
Yeah.
And then you got to see what's the benefit of, what's the benefit of not supporting the tobacco company? One benefit I can see, of course it's not the money, but it brings character. It shows you what you believe in and not. Some people don't value that, other people do.
Yeah, that's good. One thing that makes it especially difficult is because a lot of people aren't willing to work for the tobacco companies, they tend to pay better, right? It's sort of the moral tax that they, because they know that people might have ethical qualms working for them. They need to pay a little bit better to attract more people to work with them. So you might even have more incentive to work with them in that sense. These things become very difficult, especially when you factor in all these other social and economic factors. Smoking isn't just a product. Smoking is a culture, right? There's me and my girlfriend started watching Mad Men, the TV show, where everyone smokes all the time in that show, and it's a cultural thing. It's not just an individual thing. It's everyone does it. Breaking out of that kind of culture is hard. Same thing with eating meat. Right? Thanksgiving, we have entire federal holidays that are centered around eating certain kinds of meat. Right? And breaking out of that culture it's not easy for anyone. I think so. The tobacco question, I think it's a little bit easier. The really hard question, and if you want to tackle this in the discussion section, you can also do that. The really hard question is working with the military, right? So the military industrial complex also produces war machines that are designed to kill people. In the case of the military, there's not even any being shy about it, right? The tobacco executives might lie about whether the stuff kills. They might talk about the flavor or whatever and be coy about it. But there's no doubt in the military that you're building guns and bombs to kill people. But the military is also one of the biggest employers in the country, and it's one of the most lucrative employers, especially for engineers, mechanical engineering, aerospace engineers. Like, there's lots of really good jobs for engineers in the military world. And there's also this challenge, and in some sense, it's a lot harder than the tobacco issue because, nowadays it's hard for tobacco to have a whole lot of friends. You can just chat through here. I'm also going to post the video online for people to watch who weren't here during the session. So hopefully you'll be able to at least benefit from the discussion afterwards. I'm basically wrapped up. I just wanted to talk about the tobacco a little bit and make the connection to the military jobs. If I don't know if anyone has any last questions or last thoughts.
That's pretty much it. I mean, yeah, we have our viewpoints. There's,
Yeah, thanks a lot for making that interesting, Glenn. You helped a lot. Yeah, and I'll upload the video so you can watch it at your own time. Thanks everyone for showing up. I'll see you next week.
Professor, I was having a hard time through the link that you have through discussion 3. It just won't work through there.
It's not working?
I couldn't. The way I got through here was through the discussion 2 link from last week. I happened to click on it and brought me to this current meeting, but I've been trying to get on through the discussion 3 link.
And it hasn't been working?
It won't come in here through Zoom. I don't know if it's something on my end or.
Yeah, no, it probably isn't just on your end because not very many people showed up today, and a lot of people showed up last week. So I think there might be some more general problem.
Yeah, when I click on it, it just says like session is not meeting or session something.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I just been troubleshooting it ever since then, trying to get on, and I happened to find you through last week's link. It brought me to your current one now.
Yeah, so I apologize for that. The word of the day, the secret word is safety. If you want to use a secret word. That's also in the presentation.
Right. Yeah, and I'll watch the presentation. I just want to make sure the presentation goes, if I can get to the link when you post it. Is it going to be posted under discussion 3? Yeah,
it should be posted there already, but if the link that's there is not working, I'll tinker with it also and see if I can get it to work.
Okay. Yeah, if it doesn't work, I'll message you back in a little bit, and if it still doesn't work for me, I'll let you know.
Yeah, I'll also just say this: to get the live credit, all you have to do is sign in on the sign-in sheet during the time listed. So even if you don't join in the video chat, as long as you're here and signing in at that time, you'll get that credit.
Okay. I wanted to be a part of it. I couldn't get on.
Did you try your email too? Because I just went through that. That was the fastest way.
Oh, okay. What do you mean? What do you mean by the email?
Last week,
I sent out the note.
You sent out like a way to get on. You used a Zoom program, correct?
Yeah.
So I just used that. That worked fine.
Through the email link that Professor gave out?
Your Gmail account. Try entering that right now. Well, I mean, you're on, but.
All right. Yeah. What do you mean by entering the Gmail account? Like sign in?
I think it just means going to that email and clicking on the link that was in the email.
If you're on your UCI, your Gmail account, go on September 11th. The UCI email.
All right. Let me check. I don't think I have that email any longer.
Not September 11th anymore? Okay.
No. Oh wait, I have September 8th. I have a September 8th one from Professor. Is it from the Professor?
It is from the Professor, yes.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.
All right.
Okay.
We'll try this again next week and make sure that these technical issues are sorted out.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
No problem.